Hey, what's going on, Chelsea fans? Just quick heads up. This is an excerpt of a 2-hour megapod that we did covering all of Graham Potter. So again, this is just one part. If you want to see the other parts, check it out on YouTube. It'll be on our channel. Otherwise, if you want to listen to the entirety of the podcast, go to our, any podcast player, search London is Blue. You can get it there. Just a quick heads up. This is not the full pod, just an excerpt. Hope you enjoy it.
All right, so as we continue our Graham Potter pod special, pod megapod, I had to go to the source, an individual who's been in the Brighton community covering the club for an extended period of time, Andy Naylor, who writes for The Athletic, who covers Brighton full-time. Andy, welcome to the show, and maybe just living in the community of Brighton, knowing the people there, knowing the club. What's the mood and attitude after this whole saga has concluded?
Well, it's fair to say huge disappointment, really, because this comes at a time when Brighton have really never been in a better position in their top flight history, really. With Graham leading them to a club record 9th place finish last season, started the season really well, 4th place after 6 games, opening game 1 at Old Trafford against Manchester United. The transfer window was lively, including Mark Cucurella's move to Chelsea, but they seemed well set to carry on an upward path, and this has all come as a little bit of an unfortunate turn of events. But hey, that's life, isn't it? That's football.
That is football. It is definitely something that I think we can all align with here. I mean, you talk about the Cucurella deal. There obviously was a lot of work between the Brighton owners and the new Chelsea owners this summer. Obviously, Colwell coming on in a loan, Gilmore coming on a permanent deal. I think the Potter one is the one that caught Brighton supporters and Chelsea supporters as something that, he's been linked to multiple big clubs over the past few seasons, whether it was going to United or going to any other place because of just his meteoric rise. I mean, it still feels like it could be a bit of a risk for everyone. For Brighton, with the great start they've had this season, for Chelsea sending a manager who's had Champions League victory away, and then for Potter for the risk he's taking here. I mean, what's your take on just that risk level for everyone involved?
But then there's a risk in everything. I think Graham pointed out, I noticed at his opening Chelsea press conference today, it was a risk when he went to Östersunds in Sweden, as a 30-year-old, a club who sort of getting rid of managers every year. That was his starting point on his journey, on his pathway to the Premier League. I think it's interesting. We've got to believe, I think, the new ownership at Chelsea and take that at face value, that they see a slightly different direction. Chelsea has been a club, hasn't it, where managers don't last very long at all. Let's say not much stability. I certainly think Graham would have needed to be convinced that there was more of a kind of long-term thought in this. He obviously was convinced by that. That remains to be seen. But I think with Graham, there was always the feeling it was just a matter of time before a move fell, but nobody knew quite when that would be or what it would be. My feeling actually was that a more likely scenario was going to be the England job, depending what happened with Gareth Southgate, with the World Cup. Because if we just go back a little way, there didn't seem to be an opening at one of the top 6 clubs on the horizon. And that, to me, was the next logical step for Graham, because he's taken Brighton to a place where they're really progressing past the types of clubs that might have been seen as a step up for him in the not too distant past. The likes of West Ham, Aston Villa, Leicester, those kind of clubs, the kind of next group of clubs down. So because you didn't see that top 6 opportunity arising, that was kind of a little bit of a comfort blanket. Then, of course, this, Chelsea lose at Dynamo Zagreb, and before we know where we are, Graham Potter, Chelsea, and once it became evident that he was the target, I think it was a fairly inevitable outcome.
In terms of the relationship that seemed to have developed, blossomed between Tony Bloom and the ownership at Brighton, and then with Todd Bowley and the ownership at Chelsea over this window, it seems like they found quick, similar footing in the way that they were able to work out deals, to work with one another, particularly, players are one thing, but managers are another. I guess how is that perceived or seen in the Brighton side, and with Bloom's camp, about how it is to work with Chelsea, and allowing someone like a manager to leave? I know that there's been a very open kind of policy within the Brighton ownership on, hey, we don't want to hold players in. I think the quote was, we don't want to be a prison to our players or our staff. And if they have an opportunity, we'll use the contract we have, but we really want to be enabling good things for all of our people. I mean, it's a pretty great, to me, it sounds great. How have you seen that kind of evolve under, Bloom's maybe leadership?
Well, there's been a lot of talking in a short space of time, mainly actually involving Paul Barber, the chief executive, Brighton, and Todd Bowley. So Paul Barber sort of runs the club day to day on behalf of the owner chairman, Tony Bloom. So Paul takes particular responsibility for outgoing deals, hence his involvement with Mark Cucurella. Prior to that, there was this dinner invite from Todd Bowley to Premier League owners at the Premier League meeting. I know that Paul Barber spoke with him there. You had the Cucurella, Colwill in the other direction, and then, of course, ultimately Graham as well. So there were a lot of conversations between them. There's been no problem from the Brighton end in the way Chelsea have conducted themselves through this process. They came through the front door. It was really a case of, once Brighton knew that the compensation figure would be met, the buyout clause, then talks went ahead. And Brighton have this policy of not holding staff back, not denying them the chance of at least a conversation, providing the circumstances, i.e. the financial circumstances, are a good fit for them. And the reason they take that view is they think it's counterproductive to do otherwise, that perhaps people would just go behind their backs anyway if they didn't do that. And it's also this kind of view that it would be harmful to them and the perception of them as a club, for whether it be players, managers, who see Brighton as a club that will allow you to develop, and then if bigger opportunities go along, they won't hold you back. So they take the view that it would be pretty damaging to that kind of philosophy if they were seen to be holding people back from those opportunities, those ambitions.
And I think one of the things that, there's always a group of people that seemingly will uproot themselves and leave in tow with a manager. And so in this scenario, we have Reed, Hamburg, McCauley, Bruno, and Roberts all leaving with Potter to Chelsea. And that's something I think stings for a lot of people, but there's long-term relationships that have been built there. I guess, one, what's your understanding of the role that they'll play each, or what role they played at Brighton, and what we could expect at Chelsea? And then two, are any of those a surprise? I think Bruno is probably the one that's the biggest surprise for a lot of people, that he actually ended up making the move to Chelsea.
Well, that really falls into two parts. First of all, when Graham was appointed, he brought with him from Ostersund's and Swansea, worked with them for a long time. So that's Billy Reid, his assistant, Bjorn Hamburg, his coach, and Kyle McCauley, recruitment analyst. Now that's quite interesting in itself. I thought that was interesting when he was appointed by Brighton. It's not that often that you see a manager bring a recruitment analyst with him. But he's known Kyle for a long time, worked with him for a long time. Kyle instinctively knows the types of player Graham likes to fit in with his system and the way he plays. So I don't think there was ever going to be any doubt that those three would join Graham at Stamford Bridge. The two that upset a lot of people were Bruno and Ben Roberts, the goalkeeping coach, both long-serving members of staff at Brighton who, if you like, Graham inherited Ben and added Bruno once he'd finished. He retired at the end of the 2018-19 season at the age of 38. Added him to his coaching staff. So those two departures, I think, I mean, particularly disappointed Brighton. Disappointed, I use that word advisedly. They weren't angry; they kind of understood, but that would have continued a sort of sense of continuity, really, to have those two staying. But what an opportunity for them! How can you deny them really that opportunity and that wish to take it on? A lot of people talk about finances. Of course, there's a financial element to this, but to my knowledge and my understanding of speaking to people, that's not Graham's main motivation. It's not the main motivation of Bruno. It's not the main motivation of Ben Roberts. You know, they're being given an opportunity here to further their careers at a high level. And I think that's the main motivation for them. In terms of the way that splits, like Billy has been alongside Graham as his assistant, Glaswegian, quite a character. As you'll find, there's various reasons dating back to his time at Ostersund's. He's done a bit of acting here and there, which is quite interesting. Bjorn is quite young, sort of mid to late 30s now, and he sort of came on board at Ostersund's, having been at a pretty low level in Sweden. He's quite smart tactically, does a lot of video clips, works mainly with the defence. Bruno, although he was a right back as a player, works predominantly on the attack, and that can be out of possession as well, the way they set up out of possession. I know he was highly regarded in that role as well. So you've got quite an interesting and diverse mix of people there around Graham.
You know, I feel like that speaks to the way that he has built up and assembled his core, that there's a lot of loyalty, that there's a lot of building of camaraderie, and he values those relationships. I mean, I think we even heard that in some of the importance of that in the initial press releases he had through the Chelsea website, and then also in, you know, reasons for taking the job and the chemistry, you know, the intelligence and the relationship, like with the new ownership here. I guess if you were to define Potter's style relative to other Brighton managers, or what you think are kind of the core principles of his on-pitch performance, are there 2 or maybe 3 words that you would use to describe Potter ball, or, you know, whatever fun terminology you want to use for it?
Well, it's hard to really pin down, but I would say that the key thing is flexibility. Mm-hmm. Flexibility in terms of formation to begin with, because he won't always necessarily have a set formation. He has systems he favours. Most cases in Brighton, he's usually started games with a back 3, but very often that ends up as a back 4. So in his time at Brighton, we've seen lots of changes in system, not just from game to game, but during games. And you also see a lot of changes in players' positions as well. He's developed this situation where players are almost taken outside of what they were normally accustomed to, and they've popped up in different areas of the pitch, roles they haven't really played in before. So it's a very kind of fluid philosophy. He likes players to take responsibility for themselves on the pitch, but they are very well prepared in terms of what their roles are, both individually and collectively.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen that. You know, there have been points in games where he'll start with a back 3, but it's not working. 15 minutes later, it's a back 4 in what he's doing. So he's very comfortable tinkering in the live elements of a game, not necessarily staying, as you said, to a strict formation or kind of being very rigid. The flexible definition, I think, makes a lot of sense to us. We've seen him go toe to toe with the big teams over his time at Brighton. And obviously reaching ninth place last season as well. How do you think that maybe he's developed as a manager in his time at Brighton? Have you seen things that maybe when he started he was doing, but things that he's either worked out of his game or improved on over the past few years?
Sure, yes, he's definitely grown and developed in his, what are we talking, three full seasons at Brighton. Obviously, the Premier League was a step up for him. That was new to him, coming from a season at Swansea. He'd taken over there when they were in financial difficulties, let's say, having been relegated. So he did a pretty sound job there in difficult circumstances. So it was a step up, and we've seen him grown. I think because of the fluidity I've spoken about, take a little bit of time for players to adjust. Obviously, with the greatest respect to the Brighton players, he's now generally going to be have around him a higher level of player, so that kind of integrating process might not take perhaps as long. And we've also seen him kind of grow in confidence. Really, I've noticed it just in the sort of press environment, press conferences before and after matches. He's always been from the day one, always very polite, very willing to answer any questions, but didn't necessarily say that much when you came away from the press conferences. But I look now, and he's gradually sort of grown in that sense, been more prepared to sort of give an opinion and some insight. So yeah, I think he's certainly sort of developed across his time at Brighton, and I would say is ready now for that next, albeit big step.
Is there things, or are there things that you've observed that could be potential pitfalls for him in this move, things that he'll need to avoid? Because as much as we would love to assume that our football manager is perfect, I mean, at least he is on day one. The first match, everything's off the rails. But what are the things maybe that he has to think about, or maybe have a deeper reflection on how he works that out of his game, or tackles something a little differently in this move to Chelsea?
Well, sometimes you could argue, but this is just really looking at the in-game detail, that sometimes the kind of fluidity we talked about, but maybe that's overdone sometimes. Maybe there's a bit of overthinking involved on occasions. I know there's a narrative out there about, well, he's never dealt with big players, big egos. Um, I guess that is a question mark, is a step. But I'd counter that. If you look at his educational background, he's got a degree in emotional intelligence. He's pretty big into the way you deal with people and the way you get the best out of people. So I wouldn't necessarily be too concerned about that. I mean, he can be ruthless. I wouldn't want to leave the impression that he's just this nice, easygoing guy, and everything's hunky dory. He can be ruthless and make big decisions when he wants to. Wants to. I'll give you two examples of that. He made a really big call in having Robert Sanchez as his goalkeeper. Matty Ryan, Australian number one, was pretty well established, had been pretty consistent, but Graham fast-tracked Robert into the team, a sort of academy graduate, really, having come from Spain initially. And, Robert has very quickly developed into a really high-class goalkeeper. He's in the Spain squad. And the main reason for that, really, or one of the main elements of that, was that Robert's very comfortable with the ball at his feet, and in terms of distribution. Graham, that's part of his style, to play out from the back, and it's almost like having that extra player to start those moves. And then there was an occasion when Neil Maupay, who was the top scorer at Brighton for all three of Graham's full seasons in charge, now at Everton, French forward. Bit of a fiery temperament on the pitch. He's very different off the pitch, but he's one of those guys once he steps onto the pitch. And there was an occasion after a home game against West Brom where there was a bit of a fracas in the dressing room. Neil was involved in that, and he was dropped for the next game. He was left out. And like I say, at the end of the window, there's a long time, a lot's gone on in between. Then it's nothing to do with that incident that I'm talking about. But at the end of the window, he was sold to Everton. So he's not afraid to make big decisions. But I would definitely say that he would much prefer collaboration over confrontation.
That's a thing I think we would all hope for and aspire to have that versus the confrontation element of it. And I think that, you know, he'll see or enter a dressing room. Obviously, has had a little bit of a turnover, has players that, you know, at Chelsea we thought might leave this window, are still here, want game time, weren't getting it. So he's walking into an area where I think he's really going to get a chance to apply that background and his experience to find a way forward with some of these players who maybe feel they're on the outs and don't have an opportunity, or, you know, potentially make, you know, with the backing of the organizational structure, the decision, you know, come January. That I think crazy to think about. We only have 8 or 10 different games before the World Cup comes in another transfer window, but here we are. So it's seeming like he's kind of walked into a situation where he's going to have the support from the you know, the leadership structure of Chelsea, the new leadership structure. He'll have the support with his staff being here to help be around him and support him, and he'll have the backing of kind of all the fans of just getting ready to go and being able to take forward the football on the pitch and get some results. And it feels like it's going to all work out great, except until we play Brighton again. And I'm sure it's going to be another draw, right? Another dull draw.
Well, that's not far away, is it? The end of the month,
No.
29th of October. Graham will be back at the Amex. And it's a shame in a way, because I fear that what might have been quite a warm reception when he comes back could actually be quite hostile, depending on what happens in the intervening 4 weeks. You know, maybe feelings would have calmed down a bit, but I certainly think there would be an element of the fan base at Brighton now who will be quite prepared to give him full barrels, let's say, in a verbal sense.
Well, we hope that it is reminiscent. You know, maybe it'll be reminiscent of all the other games where it's just a 1-1 draw, and we walk away with shared points, and no one feels too bad at the end of it. That would be you know, maybe that, you know, I think Brighton will want to win, obviously, with the aspirations that they have this season and kind of the trajectory they're on. When you look at how do you replace Graham Potter, maybe just as, you know, from our view, you know, we've taken something of great value. We've taken a wonderful individual and his staff. What does the situation look like for Brighton? I feel like, you know, with what they've done this season, the start of the season, the players they brought in, I actually think that managerial appointment looks like something in hotter demand, where there are going to be no shortage of applicants versus maybe in prior seasons it would have been more recruiting from the management to get somebody in.
Yeah, absolutely right. I mean, if you look at it now, it's an attractive job, isn't it? You look at the way the squad has developed under Graham. That squad is still there. A lot of exciting young athletic players, a blend of a sort of hardcore of experience in there as well. I know there's been a lot of interest in the job, but Brighton are always forward planning. They do an awful lot of that, and the head coach is no exception. They'll have had in mind certain people they've been keeping their eye on. A lot of the stuff they do is quite data driven, so they'll have been looking at various coaches, managers, really across the globe, who they might pinpoint as potential successors. And then they'll start drilling down. That's really the process that's going on now on that list, because obviously they couldn't have predicted when Graham would go, who to, and what the circumstances would be of those individuals' coaches. And new names can crop up as well. So that's the ongoing process for them. they've been quite fortunate in one respect. I mean, there are not many ways in which you could look at losing Graham as head coach and most of the backroom team as fortunate. But they've lost him after 6 matches and yet have got 3 weeks, simply because of a sort of combination of circumstances, really. The Crystal Palace game being called off initially because it clashed with a rail strike. The death of the Queen, which followed that, and obviously caused the postponement of all the fixtures last weekend when they were due to go to Bournemouth. There was no prospect of the Palace game being hastily rescheduled because Sussex and Surrey police forces are needed in the capital to help support the Metropolitan Police operation for the Queen's funeral next Monday. So Brighton don't play again till October 1st. That's against Liverpool at Anfield. So they're going to take their time. They do things methodically anyway, forensically, they always have. So they're going to make the most of that opportunity to take their time and try and get what will be a difficult decision to replace Graham right. The new man's got a nice easy start because October is just Liverpool away, Spurs at home, Man City away. So yeah, won't be the easiest of opening months for whoever it is.
No, it's and I know we have Potter with his I think he even said it, maybe the first Champions League match he attended is one he's going to manage against Salzburg here coming up this week. And, he gets Crystal Palace on October 1st. So hopefully he can do all Brighton fans a solid and beat them quite handily. I'm sure they would appreciate that.
I didn't realise that. I didn't realise they were playing Palace. Now, that's one game where the Brighton supporters were furious that he's left. We'll probably be willing him on.
Maybe before we close out, I think the one other individual we didn't touch on a whole lot, because we touched on a lot of winners in this situation, or kind of what the impact is for a lot of them. Billy Gilmore is probably the most interesting one. He, as a player, I think partially because Potter wanted him, but also having worked with Reed previously and kind of the Scottish connection there, comes to the side, and now seemingly that whole infrastructure disappears right at the end of the window. Any sense on, maybe how he would feel or how he's been feeling about the move, or how the club feel about him being there still? Would he have been scouted independently of that, with some knowledge that something like this could happen?
It's very unfortunate timing, isn't it, from his point of view? There's no denying that. And there's no denying that I'm sure sort of Graham and the style of play would have been an attraction for Billy. Having said that, there's still David Weir at the club. Now, David Weir is the technical director now, succeeded Dan Ashworth, former Scottish international, Everton and Glasgow Rangers defender, went into management. He knows Billy well. He was the assistant manager at Rangers when Billy made his debut up there. So there's still somebody in the camp who knows Billy well, and of course that wouldn't have been the only reason for Billy coming. So I'm sure they'll be able to get. I'm sure he'll get over that. I'm sure the club will smooth that process as well, and I'm pretty sure he'll become a pretty important part of the midfield mix for Graham Potter's successor.
Awesome. Well, Andy, thanks so much for giving us the perspective and the view from the Brighton side on how all this went down and what Chelsea are getting in terms of Graham Potter. And best of luck to you and Brighton in every match except the ones that Chelsea play against.
Yeah, I guess the same applies. Be unlucky at the Amex on October the 29th.
You hope our card is declined at that point. That's what it is.